Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to part 3 of U.S. gun laws, guns, and crime. This episode is going to explain the relationship between firearms and crimes in the United States and compare it to the world abroad. So if you're overseas, you're also going to want to listen into this. This episode is probably going to be a little bit incendiary because I'm going to try to be as objective as possible, and objectivity very rarely fits inside of any sort of political spectrum. So whether you're liberal or conservative, pro or anti-gun, you're probably not going to like some of the things that I have to say, but I do hope that you sit around and listen to them. The gameplay that you're seeing in the background is me using the Akimbo TAC-45. So what I like to do is kill 1, 2, 3 people, find a gun I like, I'll pick up the gun, scavenge it, and roll with that, and hopefully do pretty well. The original intention for this episode was that I was going to do a lot of research and I was going to come up with some hard facts and make my own graphs and compare the stats in the United States and Canada and United Kingdom and Germany and Russia and Mexico and Japan and all these other different countries that have various gun laws, and I was going to compare the strictness of their gun control or ownership to the relative levels of crime and various types of crime. However, I found that wasn't really something that I could do. I did find one really well-made report that supposedly had all of this laid out for me. Unfortunately, I also found about 100 criticisms to that report, just blasting it for a dozen different things. And what I wanted to talk about first was why I had such a hard time finding these stats and why we're going to use more subjective ones instead of hard objective numbers today. There's a link down there in the video called Pick Your Own Crime Stats. I'd recommend that you listen to that, but I'm going to run over it briefly. There are 4 main reasons why crime and firearm stats are so nebulous these days. Number 1 is you have biased sources. It's very difficult to find a source on this information from somebody that doesn't have a bias or an input, or even myself. I have biases. I try to be objective, but I do have biases. Everybody does. They come from lobbying organizations, they come from gun right organizations, they come from political groups, they come from mothers whose teenage sons died in gang violence, or from hunters that want to keep hunting. It's very difficult to find a purely unbiased source. But perhaps a bigger problem with this, you're thinking, well, just go to FBI.gov, just go to government on whatever country reports the crimes and find things. Different countries report and classify crimes differently. There are different classifications for violent crimes across various countries, and there's actually different definitions of what constitutes a crime, and do they report the convictions or just the arrest or just the crime reports. The best example of this, or actually even how they count them is differently. The best example of this would be Julian Assange. If I'm not mistaken, he was accused of rape, which was why they were going to extradite him to, I'm not exactly sure where they were extraditing. I think it was like Sweden or something, or Norway. And the problem is their definition of rape was having sex without a condom. And that was about it. Or it's very, the definitions vary, or in some of the other countries, when you report a rape, you can report a rape in the United States. You report, I was raped 100 times. They write down rape. In a different country, if you report, I was raped 100 times, even if it was only one person raping you, they would report that as 100 different crimes. So some countries have like 1,000% the rape rate as other countries do because different reporting. And you find this with assaults and other things too on occasion, that I got into a fight is 1 crime versus 5 people beat me up being 5 crimes, and that kind of skews the numbers a little bit. There's also something called the unreported crime rate. There are tons and tons of crimes that go unreported every single day, usually small things, tax evasion, traffic, that sort of stuff, but there's also assault, domestic abuse, gunfights, murders even that go unreported. The best example of this would be in Japan. There is a big pressure on the police force and on the country as a whole to promote peacefulness, that the whole country's at peace, that they're unified, that there's no reason to worry. Kind of the opposite of our media. Panic, the world is ending. So what happens is, if the Japanese police find a body somewhere, and in the United States, we would assume that it's a crime. We would do an investigation. Is this a murder? Blah, blah, blah. If they find a body, and even if it appears to possibly have been a murder, there's a big pressure on them to just write it off as a suicide. Suicide, body found, body recovered. They don't investigate the murder because they know that there's a low probability of them solving the murder. And what they're more interested in is having a very high murder solve rate versus a low murder solve rate, because that would scare the general populace. And that is also true in other more chaotic countries. I'll pick on South Africa here, Johannesburg. Tons and crazy stuff going on there every single day that never gets reported. And lastly, there are just flawed methods for reporting things that don't make in middle managers that edit things up. What gets to the internet may not have always been what was in the original report. And there are flawed methods of analysis, and comparing all these things became way more difficult for me than what I originally had in mind. So instead of just bombarding you with raw numbers on my own graphs, I'm going to try to tell you three major trends that I found. Oh, I almost forgot something. There are also major cultural differences about crimes, and the numbers get skewed very heavily in countries that have problems with crime syndicates. My best example of that would be Mexico has a relatively low crime rate outside of the gangs, but when you factor in the gangs, it's just insane. And then there's countries like Russia that have a completely different cultural system and a mafia going on that also makes it very hard to compare with other equally developed countries. But back to my three things, my three trends that I found that relate to crime and guns. Number one, that the violent crime rate in the United States is actually declining. The violent crime rate now is about half of what it was 20 years ago. The total amount of violent crimes, the amount per capita, because it grows proportionally, and the murder rate per capita are actually about half of what they were in 1990, 1991, 92, something like that. And in the rest of the world, on average, the violent crime, the level of war and conflict and strife is going down. There are individual places where it's getting worse, and there are places where it's always been bad, but as a whole, on average, it's decreasing. Number two, that this is the big one that people aren't going to like too much. The major cause of crime are these three things: relative poverty, lack of education, and perceived lack of equality. Poor people are very desperate. They're often not educated. They don't have, I'm not trying to say that poor people are evil, but if you think about slums, ghettos, people that live in shanty houses outside the big cities, this is what I'm talking about. They have no education. They have a limited, I would say, moral fiber due to the lack of education. The direct consequence of stealing and acting out and behavioral issues are there. The poverty makes them desperate enough so that the lack of education can cause them and drive them toward crime. And the biggest factor here, not so much the education, the other three, is the perceived lack of inequality. People in these sort of desperate situations see themselves as being less than that of their, let's say, more well-to-do counterparts. They believe that justice for them is different than justice for their counterparts. I'll use the example of, let's say me. I'm a middle-class white American. I'm a ghost. There are lots of, I'll say, lower-class black Americans that live in the ghetto, and compared back and forth, like if he were to look across the street at me, he would probably see me as getting a justice plus or preferred justice, where he's getting extreme justice or something like that. And this perceived lack of equality seems to cause crime, because if I have justice plus and he has no justice, then, if he steals from me or does something bad to me, then that levels it out. And this isn't just a black-white thing in the U.S. This happens in pretty much every country. Perceived lack of equality is a big one. And the presence of firearms here is what changes things. Those were two that didn't relate to firearms. The presence of firearms seems to increase murder rates compared to countries that own guns, where there's lots of guns, where you can own a gun legally versus where you can't. It's very difficult to follow all of this. The presence of firearms does not change the crime rate, but it does increase the murder rate, because if you have access to a firearm, you're going to be much more likely to use that when you're robbing a store. And it's kind of easy to go wrong with a gun and shoot somebody, hurt yourself, hurt somebody else, hurt a bystander. So the presence of firearms definitely increases murder rates. So in short, the guns do not cause the crime. This is the huge misconception on the liberal or more democratic parts of the United States, is that guns cause crime. Guns don't cause crime. Presence of guns with crime just makes crime worse. However, on the flip side of that, the Republicans and the more conservative people in the United States like to think that gun ownership allows you to deter crime on your own, when in reality it's just the opposite. That if I own a gun and I run a little store, a criminal to rob the store has to own a gun to get me. And we've escalated this beyond a knife or a baseball fight into a gunfight, and it makes things much more violent. So if your goal, if you're a politician or if you're voting, is to just reduce the crime rate, to reduce the violent crime rate, and to a lesser degree the murder rate, then you want to focus on three things. You want to have more education for the citizenry. You want to make sure that there is more employment to prevent poverty, to prevent desperation, and to make sure that the perceived equality and justice is higher. The interesting thing about this is more of a academic kind of pursuit and less than a practical one, is that it doesn't even have to be real equality. We can be completely unequal, but it has to do with perceived equality. Typically, perceived equality is very close to real equality, but I just thought I would point that out. The perceived equality needs to increase, and these three things will drive down crime. They'll drive down violent crime. They'll drive down murder rate. They'll drive down everything else. However, if your goal is just to reduce the murder rate and not change the overall crime as much, then you remove firearms. You take firearms out of the picture, our murder rate is going to plummet down closer toward maybe the Scandinavian kind of countries, probably less than the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom actually has more violent crime and a slightly less murder rate than us. That's where I'm basing the bulk of this out of. So you remove guns, murder rate goes down. Crime stays about the same. You improve education, employment, perceived equality, everything's going to go down. Murder rate probably not as much as you're removing. As you do both, of course, then crime's going to decrease, murder rate's going to almost disappear. So remember these three things. More guns does not equal more crime. They're totally unequal here. However, more guns equals more shooting, and more shooting with crimes equals more people dying, more deaths. That's the best way that I can explain it. That's the most objective answer that I have. And this one even goes against my own personal biases because I'm a gun-owning American, and pretty soon, due to the amount of death threats I get in my inbox, I'm going to be a concealed carry American, concealed carry Texan, just for my own personal safety. But when you're voting, I want you to remember these things, that if you're voting to ban firearms, you can go ahead and comfortably know that that will lower the overall murder rate in this country. Your chances of dying in a violent crime will decrease drastically, but it will also remove a safeguard from protecting yourself. That's kind of the mutually assured destruction logic that we have here, is that, okay, so if everybody has a gun, the murder rates are going to be high. Got it, but I also have a gun, so I can shoot somebody if they try to hurt me. It's a crazy kind of back and forth logic, but that's how it works. So when you're voting, you need to kind of pick your own poison and know that no guns is a low murder rate, but you also can't protect yourself if somebody has an illegal firearm and you're just kind of up a creek without a paddle. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you learned something from it. I hope that there's some kind of takeaway here, and I'm sorry that I couldn't provide you with really hard numbers, but as I said, they were very difficult to get a handle on. As always, I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.